Hello, Ted. We're here. We meet to raise questions, to confront ourselves with our friend Shakespeare, his Julius Caesar, and explore it for the sake of exposing ourselves to the questions that the play raises and see if perhaps those questions are still with us, how they might be appearing in our own times, and more specifically on the political stage, which is a theater in its own right. So we're not going to take much time, in fact, no time at all, discussing the historical context of the play, but we'll take that play as illuminating, and I think this is the hermeneutical approach for the center to be, as illuminating for us our context, which at its basis is our permanent context, the context being the human condition. All right, so we can't deal with everything about this play, so we figured we'd focus on the relationship between two major characters of the play, right? And I'll let you name them and present these two fellows.
All right, so as you mentioned, Marco, we're going to talk about Brutus and Cassius, and they in a way, I remember reading Caesar the first time and being surprised that Caesar was he seemed almost a minor character in the play. He's in it so short for such a short time, but the main characters really are Brutus and Cassius, and then Antony maybe as like the third most prominent character in the play. But Brutus and Cassius come on the scene very early. They're in Act 1, Scene 2, and the tone of the way they come together is, I would say, apprehension or nervousness in a way. Is they're standing outside of this race. Brutus decided not to go in. Cassius decided not to go in as well. Sort of, it seems he sees Brutus isn't going in and he holds back and says, "Hey, are you going into the race? If you're not, maybe I'll stay back and talk to you." And the nerves that are sort of, there's a tension that's there at the beginning of the scene, and it sort of comes to a head when Brutus confesses, I'm worried that the people are going to crown Caesar the king. And this is essentially the unspoken thing that they're discussing for the beginning of their conversation, and it's really the topic of it's the impetus for everything they discuss for the entirety of the scene. And essentially this whole scene is just Brutus and Cassius in dialogue, almost in a platonic way. It's just them exchanging these ideas and trying to provoke one another in different ways to certain responses, and more so it's Cassius trying to convince Brutus to come to his cause. That cause being the cause of the Republic, the cause of, as Cassius would say it, but really the cause of anti-Caesarism really would be maybe the way to think about it, because Cassius sees Caesar's threat, and the content of that we can get into. But I think that's a good way to generally frame it, is that's what we're looking at in this conversation, and we see them standing outside of this race, having this tense conversation, and discussing Caesar directly and indirectly.
Yes. So Caesar is first and foremost a problem.
Yes.
He is a big question mark, we might say. So the first question is Caesar, which is a little bit like saying that that Caesar is a kind of God, because in theological terms, the first question, the first problem is God himself. And of course, there is you see in the play that Caesar is, well, he is the Pope. He is the highest priest. So somehow in him, you have a king and the Pope. Now, of course, in Shakespeare's times, nobody knew anything about this conflation, did they? Um, or maybe they did. So it's probably a lingering problem. And what happens with this Caesar? Immediately we find out he's troubled too. Um, on the one hand, he doesn't listen to the soothsayers. He doesn't listen to the priests, to the poets. And throughout the play, of course, some people try to warn him, watch out, don't go that way. And he dismisses him, but a bit out of fear. In fact, he's afraid of dreams. So he's afraid of the otherworldly. So it looks like he is somewhat pretending to be the Pope or the Pontifex Maximus, but he doesn't really believe it.
And if I may, he even in a later scene in particular, I'm thinking about the main scene with Caesar. It's the one with his wife when they're discussing her dream. That's the scene where he's the most involved. He has the most dialogue, and he's the most candid because he's with his wife. But he's still, even when he's in private and he's with his wife, he describes himself almost like the God of the Old Testament. He describes himself as, that the things that have seen him, they've only seen my back parts. If they saw my front parts, they wouldn't even be able to withstand my presence, which literally happens in the Old Testament. That when God unveils his face, people die. He speaks about when they're just before he's killed. Spoiler, Caesar gets killed in Julius Caesar. Just before he's killed, they're kneeling before him and supplicating to him, and he says, "You can't change my will by asking me. My will is set in stone because I'm not like other men. I am Caesar." And Antony feeds into this in this first scene. Antony, Caesar says, "Antony, I want you to do X, Y, and Z," and Antony says, "When Caesar speaks, it is done." There's not like, he makes sort of the conflation that Kant, I think, makes, that God doesn't have a will per se because there's the immediacy for God. There's no gap between what he desires and what occurs.
So obviously, for Cassius and Brutus, this can be a problem.
Yes.
And there is this article that you know of that came out recently. It's the first of 5 installments, and it deals with that first act of the Caesar. And there I stress something that I think, I don't know if you noticed it, but that has to do with the reason why these two characters meet, Cassius and Brutus, how they need each other somehow, how they interact, and what for. What is the goal of their interaction? Why is their interaction needed to achieve that goal? And what I suggested in that article is that somehow Brutus has, and we'll see this towards the end of the play, where there's a reference to, on his side, to the Stoics, and on Cassius's side, to Epicurus.
Yeah.
Now, however, they're compelled to modify both camps, both sources. So you have somehow a new form, a new mode of Stoicism with our friend Brutus, and of course, Stoicism being conservative, we could say today, it's being caring for tradition, for even the status quo. Caesar represents a problem for him because somehow he is seen as threatening that tradition, as bringing it to a still, as somehow resolving that tradition and not leaving enough space for the few noble men. Of course, he sees himself as noble, right? He's not one of these people in the street, and immediately we see them At the opening of the play, we see the people in the street, and including the mender of souls, if you remember him, the
Yes.
cobbler philosopher, as it were. Of course, soul has this. We have the pun between the shoes and the anima, the life, the essential life of man. And on the other hand, then we've seen Brutus, we see Cassius, and Cassius is somehow resurrecting Epicurus, but not the old one. Now, what happened? Why do you think they don't simply go back to the old Stoics? And of course, father-in-law who died, committed suicide. That's, he dismisses that. That's no good. Even mockeries of him. So the old Stoicism is not good enough. The old Epicurus is not good enough. Why? Has something happened that doesn't allow us to go back to the old conservatives and to the old Epicureans, shall we call them? If one is conservative, we don't want to call them progressives because Epicureans were not. So the Epicureans, the original Epicureans, were very conservative by today's standards. They were contemplatives, but they were, well, Epicureans, hedonists. So, but hedonists in a philosophical sense. They cared for the pleasures of the mind, right? But you can't go there. Anyway, Cassius feels that we can't. That's not what I'm about here. So he comes up with a new form. Why? Is there something that compels him, you think, to seek a new version of these two?
I think that it comes back, in my view, to what we said was the first question of the play, and it's that Caesar has changed everything. His self-understanding and his public image and his political ambitions have changed the field permanently. And this is really, if you look at all three of the Roman plays, Coriolanus, Julius Caesar, and Antony and Cleopatra, you can see the metamorphosis from sort of the small republic that's with martial virtue to Julius Caesar, where there's this emphasis on this one gigantic man, and then the gigantic man sort of fades into the background a little bit in favor of this gigantic empire in Antony and Cleopatra. And that empire, in a way, I think is what this is prefiguring, what you're pointing to. It's difficult for us to look back when we read Plato and Aristotle and these people. When they say city, they don't mean, they mean something we can't even fathom. We can't relate to it in even the most basic sense. And so in an embarrassed way, we say, well, maybe they sort of mean country, and we just kind of go with that just for the sake of the discussion. But truly, in the context, we're talking about different worlds. And the one other change that hums behind in the background in this, that's always should be on our minds, even though it's not on our lips when we're reading the Roman plays, is Christianity. Christianity is looming on the horizon, and Jesus is going to come and change the horizon for everyone. So Rome will change the horizon politically. Christ will change the horizon politically as well, but also in an eternal perspective, eschatologically, and in all of these new meanings, every single person can be saved for the first time in history. No one's ever totally really understood this until Jesus came and revealed that. And so between Caesar changing the world to an empire and Christ changing the world to creating a new world that's more egalitarian in a certain way, we can't just simply go back. It's the same way as you and I perhaps might want to go back and think, okay, let's say what Plato and Aristotle might say about this, but we can't simply do that. It has to be modified in some sense, because as Tocqueville says, we need a new political science for a world altogether new. It's the same thing essentially, and I think that would be my thought about the Stoics and the Epicureans.
Okay, Cassius I think, gives us clear indications that he believes that no return to old Epicureanism, and for that matter, old Stoicism, is concretely, practically possible. And I think that the play gives us enough beef to substantiate your suggestion that the reason is tied to the new, what we call empire, keeping in mind that the word emperor simply means king, which also means prince, which is the first citizen. But these are terms that we use to sort of suggest that there is a totalizing of this authority into one figure. The other thing to consider, of course, is that that somehow the Caesar, as you pointed out, he's not a major character. Indeed, he is somewhat of a mask. And of course, if you have any sense of practical political life, and this will always be the same, no single figure is free floating. He is supported by an elite. So, if he's there, even Hitler, if Hitler's there, it's because he has this entourage, this elite that supports him, which is to say the few. So there is no such thing as the one on his own that is, floating over the many. There's always the few that are interceding, that are mediating the relationship. Now, of course, Cassius and Brutus are part of the few, the aristocracy, what we call, right? So they have an issue with this new one. The new one seems to be at once king and, shall we say, pope. So in other words, he is somehow this world and the other world. And yes, he's somewhat of a farce of a god. You pointed out that you will die in the biblical case. You will die if you see me. Well, the irony is that they will see him behind the mask, and they won't die. He will die.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a kind of farcical take on the biblical God, of course. But right. Now, is a return possible? And I am not certain that Cassius is correct in his assessment. And let me tell you why I think so, and then you tell me what you think about my considerations here. This is a major problem that has been discussed throughout the 20th century by scholars such as Leo Strauss and his interlocutors. In what sense is a return possible? Have the fundamental problems of life changed? This could also bring up, as a corollary, a question about Christianity. Does Christianity introduce a new truth, or does it expose something that was already there? And in that sense, even vindicates what was somehow latent. Let me be clear about that pole, that tension even between the Neo-Epicureans and the Stoics. Of course, you know that these two Epicurus and the Epicureans and the Stoics were at war with each other in ancient times. Mm-hmm. We see this in Cicero. Of course, Cicero is there to witness the transition from the Republic to the Empire. With Cassius, you have somebody who is telling, we don't have time to get into the dialogue, but any reader can investigate this. Again, I have these articles that explore these dialogues, but with him, you see him approaching Brutus and telling him, in effect, and Brutus is afraid of, he has his fears, as you pointed out. He's exposing already Caesar's mortality. That's the first thing he does, right? He says, well, he looks so big, but actually I saved his life. I was better than him. He's one of us. He just pretends to be the one, but he's one of the few, right?
And if I might
Yes,
add,
yes,
Brutus, only a few lines later, when they learned that Caesar had collapsed in the race, he says, "Yeah, he has epilepsy." He confesses he knows this as well, that Caesar has this weakness.
yes, yes, yes. He's mortal. And since he's mortal, he might as well be dead. But here, he says Cassius needs his help. It's not just a physical help. We need to help each other to kill him. He needs his help in the sense that he needs Brutus's, shall we say, the people like Brutus. And people like Brutus need people like Cassius. Now, what does Cassius do? He refers to the heavens. First of all, he tries an approach, doesn't work with him. So he tries another approach. Instead of giving him his message straightforward, he relies on hearsay. And he says, look, he's selling him an ideal, what we would call an ideal. He's posing as what we would call an ideologue. He is coming up with this ideal. He's saying, look, helping Brutus understand that this ideal is just a projection of what is in our own hearts, our own turmoil. So we use this ideal, and now you are no longer Brutus, full of energy, of impetus, of this nobility, of this strength that he wants to prove to others as well as to himself. You're no longer defending the real thing. You're defending your ideal. It's going to be your ideal. And we together, I give you this metaphysical ideal, quasi-metaphysical. I made it up. We made it up. And you can use it to boost yourself up, and to all you people who are alike, who have this shall we say, this new courage, this boldness, this new nobility, you can establish a new world. And these two terms, the new and the noble, understood as this bravery that is needed to enter into the world, into this new world, are spelled out at various points in the play, and already remind us of something that's going to appear in another play, when, of course, our friend Shakespeare has someone speak about a brave new world. But now the problem is that there's a price to pay, and Brutus has to distance himself from the old Stoics, who relied on what, as we know, Cato, this bloodline, almost a blood tie to their authority, to their Caesar. There is almost shall we say, a physical bond in terms of authority, father-son relationship. That has to be severed. It is to be, that bond is to be replaced by the alliance between the idea, an abstract idea, and a new type of virtue that requires not only to be good in a traditional way, but also to be compromising, to be wicked whenever it's needed. And this is where it seems to me Shakespeare is addressing most explicitly as it gets, without mentioning the name, Machiavelli.
Right.
We're at the dawn in that case. If that is the case, then we're at the dawn of our modern world. And in that case, what we have is a situation that perhaps, yes, is responding to a modification of the theater, the scenario. We have this new Caesar, the new authority, perhaps even an authority that understands itself as Christian, and that resolves that tension between this world and the other world. Be that as it may, responding to that new situation, we have an attempt to establish a new world. Is that what we have there? And if that is the case, then what does that say about our situation today? Why is Shakespeare resurrecting these characters? Clearly, he has a message. Now, is that message in response? And obviously, the echoes of Machiavelli are there. Yeah, I mean, what does Machiavelli do essentially, and what is modernity? I mean, in Leo Strauss highlighted this point, I think, quite well. I mean, you have a synthesis of somehow of the two, Stoicism and Epicureanism. Shakespeare said it first. So if this is the dawn of the modern world, how does this dawn appear today? Are we beyond this problem, or is it still somehow the case that we are unfolding as a modern world within that dawn, within that beginning?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I liked your phraseology there. You said, "Are we beyond these problems?" It makes me think of Nietzsche's response to it is the beyond good and evil, going beyond good and evil. Just saying all of this in the past, we need to move on entirely in a certain way, and assert our wills primarily, without reference to some higher moral good. But I think that what you indicate, the question, are these problems still with us? Are we still dealing with this, or are we somehow beyond it? I don't think that we're right to say we're beyond it. And I think that as you hint at, Brutus being a Stoic, Cassius being a Epicurean, and them being warm friends for almost every moment of the play. And they have tensions between them. Of course they do. Stoicism, Epicureanism, they're not easy bedfellows. But Shakespeare showing them come together under this Machiavellian premise that we have to learn to be flexible, right? You have this funny moment when the Epicurean, who's supposed to not believe in any signs in heaven, looks up and says, "You see what these birds are doing? I don't like that. I don't like our odds for this battle. This is making me nervous."
Hey, that's more than flexible. That's pretending.
Yes.
And is this sorry, but is this is a question that it gives me an itch. Is this a necessary condition to enter into the modern world?
Do we have to be Machiavellians?
Do you have to pretend to be good? Do you have to pretend to be virtuous, with the understanding that you can no longer be actually virtuous, actually good, because the time to be good is gone. That was in the ancient world when you could be, or actually believe to be virtuous in the classical sense, believe to be, but now we know that that was not possible to begin with. In fact, look at Brutus's father-in-law. He's mocking him because he realizes that he was a fool. He believed to be dying for a noble cause, but he was a fool. In other words, ancient virtue, ancient goodness is a mirage that has been replaced by an as if, a make-believe ideal that allows us to all pretend to be good and virtuous and noble. It's all a pretense. That's why it's not only, I mean, it's sure, it's difficult for them to get along with each other because, of course, as you point out, they stand on opposite poles to begin with, but now they stand as enemies in the heart, but outside they pretend that they're friends. They're almost brothers, knowing quite well that they're not.
There's even the humorous scene where they have their strongest disagreement. They're talking after a battle and talking about how the battle went and didn't go well, and Cassius feels that Brutus has taken too much preeminence, and there's this exchange, and a poet of all people wanders in and he says, we should be at accord with one another and we should be friendly. And they go, "Ha, shows what you know, we're best friends." We don't have any disagreements whatsoever. Now get out of here, you stupid poet. And in a way, it's the poet brings to the surface just explicitly what we're talking about. The poet being the representative of classical religion in a certain way, or classical education in the city. It's this poetic or this musical foundation. He comes in and he says, he gives the messages that you expect from somebody who has that role as an educator in the city. And in this new horizon, they look at him and they say, we're done with you. We're not going to do it that way anymore. But as you note, it also exposes that maybe that was artificial to begin with, what that poet was doing and the way that they were responding to it before the change. But I think that
they certainly come to believe that. Cassius certainly, I mean, he even convinces Brutus finally, because Brutus at the beginning is not sure about that. But he convinces him, I think, pretty effectively that old virtue was not real. It needs to be superseded by a pretense that is conscious. Before you were pretending, but you weren't conscious about it. Now we can pretend and be conscious about it. And that's why we can do what the ancients were not able to do. In other words, overcome that problem. We pointed out earlier, the problem being the guy in the title. Caesar is a problem. If you could just establish a new world based on pretense, the pretense of virtue and so forth, the pretense of nobility, even the pretense of bravery, because they're chickening out in the battlefield when it comes up, behind the screen, everybody's good. Everybody on the phone, everybody's good at writing, saying whatever they want. But then when on the battlefield, that's the test, and then they chicken out. Well, what are they going to do? Is that where we are today?
I think that that's the assessment by thinkers, even thinkers who you would hope would know better. Someone like a Kierkegaard, who's devoutly religious. He even or Pascal is another good example. These people who, rather than make an argument for the goodness of Christianity and the truth of it on its own terms, Kierkegaard says, well, we need to look the other way and leap into faith because we can't get there in any other way. Or Pascal, who says we need to look at the bargain between keeping the commandments and not keeping them and say, does it make my life that much worse to keep the commandments? And eternal damnation, that's pretty bad. Even if it's fake, my life's not going to be that bad if I keep the commandments. And if it's real, I have eternal salvation. Even these people seem to be pretending in a certain way, or Brutus, asking you to pretend.
Yes, well, Brutus takes his leap.
Yes, and exactly, precisely. And that's what I think, as you say, that's what Cassius is pulling on him to do, to make this almost Kierkegaardian leap into faith. But I don't think that although we sorry, let's
all these beeps, technology is in the way.
Yeah, I even have it closed out. I don't know why it's coming, but even though we see these questions, obviously this exact same feeling is still here, right? Because the thinkers are doing the same things. I don't think that assessment ultimately wins out. And I think that Shakespeare's indicating for us that the innovations, both of Caesar and of Brutus and Cassius, are mistaken in their premises. That you don't have to choose between Caesar and Brutus. That the choice is not between the old republic and the new empire, but that we have to think about this issue that you're talking about, the issue that the poet brings up. And this, whenever you see a poet show up in a Shakespeare play, your ears should perk up, because that means that Shakespeare's trying to tell us something. And he has a couple of poets show up. One of them gets murdered and the other one gets shooed away.
And I'd throw in also a cobbler in there.
Yes.
And that's right at the beginning, the little Socrates, who is of course ironic, but he has a a distinct irony with respect to Cassius's irony.
Right.
So we have, in effect, in the play, we have two types of irony. We have what I would regard as a Socratic irony, the guy who mends the souls in the street, and then the irony that we have just spoken of, which is an irony based on pretense, hiding something that is not particularly good, whereas the other one, it was hiding something that was good. Ultimately, I wonder if the demand of this ideology to establish a new brave world, a new world in which we're all brave. We're all brave because we can all pretend to be brave, right? We cannot all really believe to be brave as the ancients did, but it's not true anyway. They weren't really. That's what we're being told. But we can all pretend to be brave. Well, in this world in which we can all pretend to be brave, are we even at some point, will it ever come about that we won't even need to hide this premise? We won't even need to pretend to be good. It comes to the point where, of course, with Shakespeare, he has the battle and he exposes their mortality. So we know that the mask has melted. The wax mask has melted. And Shakespeare has done the dirty work for us. He has exposed that mask. He has shown us that project is a failure. It's doomed. And of course, you have the reinstatement of the Caesars one way or another. So they did not solve the problem of Caesar. He comes back. However, Caesar is a problem, and is a problem that seems to, throughout the play, we get indications of this. I don't know if you notice this, but we have an indication, and this is common sense. You understand this immediately. One Caesar goes and another comes back. So Caesar doesn't just mean one particular Caesar, it means all Caesars. So you get rid of one, another one comes in to replace him. So you haven't solved the problem of Caesar by just killing one.
And if I may say, they have this discussion. They're talking about it, and this is when Brutus has this comical. Doesn't matter what Cassius says, he's going to contradict it when they're making the plan. Cassius says something, he's like, nope, not doing that. We're going to do what I say. And this is when this exchange is happening. And they say, hey, should we kill Antony? He goes, no, that would seem too bloody. And in fact, I wish we could kill Caesar without getting his blood. I only want to kill his spirit. But they fail at that. His spirit comes and haunts him for the rest of the play. There's three instances of his spirit. One that we hear of, but two that are quite clearly in the text.
Unequivocal. Yeah.
Caesar is there. His spirit is visible, and he's there to haunt Brutus. There is no way to destroy just Caesar. As you say, one Caesar dies, the next Caesar arises, because it's not a person, it's an idea, it's a spirit.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
That problem lingers. Now you can, somehow it seems to me that this happens all the time in life. When we don't want to look at a problem, we want to avoid it, or we want to pretend that we have solved the problem, then the problem comes back and it scares the hell out of us.
Yeah, you can. It's, I think the oldest and most fundamental statement of that is in Horace, right? You can sweep nature out the door, but it always come back in. It can always come back in through the window and get you. Exactly. It sneaks up behind you. The next time it comes in, you're not expecting it. And that, I think, is what we see.
Yes, and it will subvert. This is the sense in the Horace passage. It will actually subvert all of your expectations and your dreams. You thought you had everything settled and solved, and now all of a sudden you're falling into dread and despair, which is what happens to these fellows. Is this what's going to happen to our civilization?
I think if it's going to happen, I think it happened a while ago. But
Okay.
I think I want to open up a part of this that we've discussed a little, but that really everything we're talking about is in this opening dialogue with Cassius and Brutus in a certain way. One of the things that struck me on this reading that I have not noticed every time is that Cassius is trying to appeal to a sense of equality when he's talking to Brutus.
Yes.
He wants to say to Brutus, you and I are equal to Caesar, or rather, Caesar is no better than us.
Sure.
And he makes that appeal on two levels. First, he does it with the physical. He says, Caesar can die like you and I can. And in fact, I saved his life. And Brutus says, yes, indeed, I've seen him have seizures. And then the second level is your name and your family is no worse than his name and his family. But he stops on the third level that you would expect, and that would be on an intellectual or political level. And the reason? Because Caesar actually has tapped into something that Cassius is only hinting at. Cassius is saying there's an equality between us. But what he would never say is there's an equality between me and the cobbler. He has the same opinion as the tribunes who are in the street who are telling these men that you need to go home because we don't celebrate Caesar. He's not all of that. And or Antony, when he's talking about Lepidus and he says that he's no better than a horse. Yes, he's a valiant man, but he's no better than a horse to me. He's just useful. He's mechanical. He's an automaton, but he's not a person like you and I are. The only person, although he only does it rhetorically, who grasps what they're lacking is Caesar. And that is an understanding of the people and a belief of the people in you.
Yeah.
So these Cassius and Brutus, they're almost there because they're talking equality. They're saying we're equal with Caesar. Caesar's no better than us, but they wouldn't go to the next level and say, and by the way, the artisan's no worse than us. And because they don't go to that level, you see the next scene or the next moment after they finish having this conversation, and they never go mental. They never say, oh, Caesar, he's not smarter than us, because he is. And that's what Caesar displays. The first thing out of his mouth is Cassius is dangerous. Me, the god Caesar, I'm not afraid of him. But if anyone were to be afraid of anyone in a political setting, Cassius is the one to be afraid of. And he gives all of the reasons, and all the reasons are dead on, because he sees through. He has a keen sight. And so he understands this truth that Cassius misses. And it's not to say that Caesar does believe that he's the same as all of the common people, but he has the appeal to the commoners that, Antony is able to adopt as soon as Caesar dies, but Brutus doesn't. When Brutus gives his speech after Caesar's death, he's unsuccessful because it's like Coriolanus. Coriolanus refuses to show his wounds because he's not going to degrade himself to the people. Brutus, in a certain way, you have my reputation, you know who I am. I killed Caesar because it was the right thing. Believe me. And the people go, okay. And then Antony gets up and appeals to the people.
Empty words. He has empty words, Brutus. He has no. Well, it is not just a matter of abstract understanding. It is a matter of being practically tied in the old-fashioned sense of the problem to the people. There is it's family. The people are my body, as a Caesar. I am bound to live for them. I represent them, and there is this physical, essentially, connection. We're all part of the same. We all share the same blood. But once you enter into the new world, you see this very well, in a story by Lampedusa, the leopard. They made a film out of this with Burt Lancaster, and it shows the transition between the Ancien Regime and the modern regime in Italy. And the old ways were about this almost feudal blood tie between the master and the servant. And there is loyalty, which is real. And you see this in Cato, in the case of the Caesar. With a new regime, well, we were supposed to have overturned that subordination. We were supposed to have freed everyone. But what happens at the end of the revolution? Same story. Well, in Shakespeare, that outcome is averted because we don't have the entering into Brave New World at the end of the Caesar. We have gotten rid of those prophets of Brave New World. But in the Lampedusa, what we have is what actually happened, namely the replacement of that intimate traditional bond with a mercenary one. And so we have one of the last lines of the book, and as well as the film, where the suggestion is that the old rulers were lions and tigers, and the new ones are hyenas and the likes of that. So what are they? They're mercenaries. They never knew anything about bravery. They never were worthy of loyalty. They never believed in anything except for pretense. And of course, in the modern world, pretense has its logo. It's on paper. It's money, and that's what happened. And you know, Spinoza, one of the greatest prophets of early modernity, who, by the way, refers to Machiavelli as acutissimus. He admired Machiavelli. Acutissimus meaning most piercing in intellect, in thought. In other words, according to him, Machiavelli had it right. Well, one of the early, we could call him critics of Spinoza, referred to Spinoza as portraying political life, or the city rather, as founded on mercantile principles. Now, ouch. Is that where we're standing today? And I'm thinking of the people who are debating, and the debates that people are usually brought up with and exposed to. And, you know, is it this party or another party? What is political life all about? And is it not all about money? And have we not decided that it is all about finances? And follow the money. Follow the money. And you'll find out why people act the way they do. Is this not to say that we're all Spinozas? Is this not to say that then, therefore, we're all Machiavellians, and that we are living in this brave new world in which old-fashioned politics, which we in the meantime have realized was only a chimera, an illusion, old-fashioned politics, or the dream thereof, has been replaced by a pretense of politics. All these, it's a theater, you know, all these politicians being these marionettes that are pulled by corporate interests, finances, and so it's all about economics, as you pointed out. Just that's the new, in the new sense of the term. It's all about money. So politics, the political problems are fundamentally financial, mercantile problems. So life, human life, what is political life, human life, is founded on mercantile principles. Is that where we stand today? And is there a way out? Can we still live? Well, you'd say, well, you're in Sodom and Gomorrah. What do you want? But can we, however, see a way out and thereby live in the light of that exit at the end of a tunnel? Can we still see that end of the tunnel? Can we still live today? What would it mean to live today in the light of that exit, and thereby not bowing to the dictates of Brave New World?
I think my immediate thought, the story you tell, and we mentioned the quote from Horace. It brings me to the question of fiat and the difference between nature and convention. And in a way, the idea that all politics is economics is a confession that all politics has become conventional, that there's no tie to nature, because our currency, our economics, our system, and even, like you say, there's people pulling strings, there's people behind the scenes. It's all fake. It's all we print our own money. It's not tied to any kind of valued idea. And then the money that others print are tied to our printed money. In the United States, it's the standard for most other currencies. And so I'm reminded of with my daughter, one of her favorite things to read is Aesop. I'm reminded of a story in Aesop about a wolf and a dog. The wolf meets this dog, and the dog is fat, and so the wolf thinks, I'm going to eat this dog. But then he thinks, this dog is in better shape than me. It's been eating, it's been well taken care of. The wolf lives in the woods, the dog lives in the city. And the wolf politely goes to the dog and says, how do I get as well taken care of as you? I want the food that you eat. I want the attention that you get. But how do I get that? And the dog says, it's really easy. You just have to go and find a master and bark at people when they come by and make sure that you protect the family. And they'll give you all kinds of delicious food, and you'll get to help take care of the animals, and you'll have all these great things. But and the wolf is thinking, I'm going for this. But then he looks at the dog and he sees something on its neck. And he says, what's that scar on your neck? He says, that's nothing at all. That's just where my collar goes when they chain me up. The wolf goes, okay, well, I'll starve to death in the woods. I'd rather starve to death in the woods than be chained up. I'd rather have my freedom. And I don't think that that's right either. Exactly. I think that in politics, the natural thing, so of course we want the things the dog has, but we also want the freedom the wolf has. And in a way, what we're saying is we want the goods of the city, but we want the freedom of nature.
Okay,
but the goods of the city and the freedom of nature are fundamentally opposed. And so what I think we need to do, the only way to make them work together, is to find the freedom of nature, the goods of nature, insofar as they adhere in the city, and promote them. So for example, in your politics, you would want to promote the family. This is a natural thing. And if you can promote the family, that would improve the politics, because this is something where it's a natural unit that, as you say, the bonds of affection that you were describing, comparing the hyenas to the lions and these different things, those are found naturally in this natural unit. Okay. That's just one example, but I'd like to hear your response to.
Okay, but now when you present the case there, is this not to say that we enter into civil society in a contractual manner, which is to say that we have a kind of utility to it? Look, I mean, we cannot enjoy our freedom tout court. We cannot live in nature. And so we are compelled by this consideration to sign a contract, say, look, I'm going to be seeking my freedom within the constraints of the city or the state or whatever you want to call it today. And is this not, in fact, a reasoning that is in fundamental agreement with both the Epicureans and the Stoics, who did not conceive human nature as political? And by the way, very often you hear people say, oh yeah, sure, we're all political, we're all social, we're all living. No, wait. What that means, that the human being is today we say political animal, life form, is that he is constituted within the political, which doesn't mean politics. It means that his nature is not constituted outside of political problems, and therefore outside of this tension that entails authority, the problem of authority, this tension between appearance and reality, between law and truth. So he is not entering into the contract, he is already there. He is already constituted that way, so that the well, shall we say? Let me just give it away. The dream of a freedom sought out in nature, outside of political problem, is just that. It's a dream, an Epicurean dream.
And I'll agree with that. I state the case too strongly because, of course, even in my point about the family is inherently social, is inherently political. No person, no individual ever came into the world, except maybe Adam. No individual alone without parents ever came into the world. The moment you're born, someone is there.
Oh, they're working on that.
Yes, that's true. But whether your mother may abandon you the second that you're born, but
sure,
when you're born, you are not alone. And there is no such thing as an individual alone in nature. And so, of course.
But not only that, if I may throw in a parenthesis, but when you're born, you already seek your God. You're seeking that certainty, which already tells you it is your nature to seek it.
Yes. And if Rousseau's account, which we're hinting at, were real, and women were in the state of nature before, or Rousseau meets Hobbes, women in the state of nature were before just abandoning their children, there'd be no human race. There would be none if we were not political, if we were not social. And so fundamentally there is, yes, the city being the first thing ontologically in the order of human social arrangements. Then of course the city is always there, but the question is, have we sucked all that is natural out of the city when we cede to convention to the level that we have, in this question of that we're going for the economic as opposed to maybe the familial, or we're focusing on industry rather than focusing on individual outcome. It's no longer focused on what would be natural. And so you have to find a way to have your cake and eat it too, if the city is going to function, is going to be good. Because if it's only conventional, all that is natural going away, a part of us dies, and we're not going to be able to flourish if we're not able to have our nature, our telos, the telos of our nature, if we can't meet it.
Well, you'd have to make a little compromise there. I mean, speak about the wolf and the dog. The freedom of the wolf in the classical sense can make sense insofar as the story could be simply telling us, look, it is not a question of seeking freedom on your own. After all, wolves do not live alone, right? But it is a question of not compromising your soul, right, Dorian Gray? So there is a point where it just might be preferable to die as Cato rather than sell your soul as Brutus, because after all, at the end of the day, it's a dead end. So there is going to be a day where there is a show off. There is, the mask falls off and you see what is there. And now at the end of the day, well, Cato did nothing shameful, whereas Brutus, not so good after all. So is that, are we still faced with, I mean, does it have to be that radical? Or is that the choice that we're faced with? Either you sell your soul, and so you become a puppet of the system for convenience. You linger on, and perhaps if you're in academia, you can even get yourself tenure. And when I was in graduate school, perhaps even in undergraduate school, many a moon ago, I remember a teacher who used to tell me, Marco, this is not the time to speak the truth. I'm paraphrasing pretty faithfully. When you will have tenure, you will be able to say anything you want. Yeah, but you see what the problem is, don't you, Alberto? I said, look, by the time I get up there, one compromise after another, I will have sold my soul to the devil, and I won't want to speak the truth anymore.
I don't know what the truth is anymore.
I won't even care.
And I think that that's right. What my answer is it's not it's not so radical as that. The choice is not between Caesar and it's the choice not between Caesar and anarchy, I think would maybe be a way to think about it. Or rather, the choice not between Brutus and anarchy. You don't there is a middle way. But the problem is it is very, very, very easy to sell your soul. That's the much easier way to go into the system and follow along with the system. The moderate way, that would be somewhere between the extremes, which is possible and is the preferred way, is much harder than either of the extremes. And
does Shakespeare give us any suggestion on this issue?
What do you think?
Well, you have pointed out that there are soothsayers, there are poets. There is, of course, the cobbler that I mentioned, that suggest that, after all, there is a poet. And the poet, and you see this in Hesiod as well, that he's somehow transcending this dichotomy between the day and the night, between work and no work. In this case, between, the extremes that Aldous Huxley highlights, and he fails to point beyond those two extremes to a third alternative, and he acknowledges that, namely between an integrated person. Today we speak about, in psychology, we speak about psychological integration, but they don't tell you that psychological integration is just a preface to social integration. But so, little caveat. So between that social integration, and of course you can embellish it. You can pretend that it's all fine, because after all, I can go to my church, I can choose my God on Sunday. So for the rest of the week, it's a compromise. The alternative that Aldous Huxley highlights is between the integrated, of course, you can pretend that you're not, but still be, and then the savage. And then he says, well, I failed to point out there is an alternative. Now, of course, Shakespeare himself, presumably, yes, would not be an integrated and brave new world, and yet he would not be satisfied with being out of it in the wilderness. In other words, being considered and living as a savage, going out of civil society when civil society has become a kind of modern technological Sodom and Gomorrah, something like that. Yes, where of course we can pretend all the better since we have the technological means to do so. And of course we can. You pointed out that we print money that is free floating in significance. Well, of course that is very much helped by the capacity that we have to export slavery. We don't have to see our slaves We
Right.
use the ones that are very far away, and we can pretend that there aren't any when we buy our fancy products. So we can pretend that we're free. We can pretend that God is not dead. We can. The whole thing is a pretense. There's an old Buddhist story about a good king being replaced by an evil spirit. He looks like the old king. Everything is in place. He pretends because he's an evil spirit, he can speak like him, but he's not the real king. As you probably know, with the Maoist revolution, you had the slaughtering of all the Buddhist monks, and then, of course, because religion is poison. So then the elite understood, the regime, the party realized, oh, shoot, the people are still thirsty for something that we cannot give them, no matter how many red books we publish. And so they said, we have to open up the temples again. However, this time, the party is going to train the monks. And so the party, the government becomes a factory that produces these new fake monks. They look like monks, recite the same prayers, but they're actually party members.
Right.
And so now they're promoting the new Buddhism under state control. Now, if we don't look at the overarching structure, we might think, hey, it's all real here. We're in Disneyland, but we can pretend that it's the real world. We don't even bother looking at the fine print on every single brick. It reads, there's a logo there. It's not the real brick. It's a Lego brick.
Right.
So do we want to live in, and so the alternative would be to be somebody like Shakespeare, as opposed to be ironic in Cassius's terms. But here is another problem. It ain't easy.
No. You get killed in the street if you have a bad reputation, and even if it's not your own reputation. I think, and that's I think fundamentally what the answer would be for Shakespeare is, well, what's missing? What's missing is a soulful education, an education that actually touches on the human things and the divine and what is good and true and beautiful. And if we can pick back up an author who can provide that, Shakespeare in a way was the poet of England, and for a time really the poet of America. If you can find a way to integrate this kind of literature and beauty and absorb it and put it into the bloodstream and the brains, and for that matter, you don't have to make the schools Christian, but if they're reading the Bible, you're also getting poetry from that's of a similar quality and of a similar purpose. That if the citizens are soulful, then a lot of these things don't happen, or they can be fixed. And I think that in a way, Alan Bloom, maybe in a backwards way, gets at this in Closing of the American Mind, because he's no friend to religion, but in a way says, well, we need it because of these things. But that's what he's getting at with the Souls Without Longing. That was what the original title was going to be. And the souls are not without longing by nature. The souls have been taught to be without longing, but we can teach them again to long and to go for what is good and beautiful and true, and make that their aim. And if that is the aim of the citizen, then these things, these issues that we see in the state, they go away. But as you said, it's not easy being the poet. And as we see with Cassius and Brutus, when a poet comes along and gives them some sensible advice and wants to help them and say, hey, let me educate. I have this role. I'm this poet. Let me educate you. They kick him out. They laugh at him. They say, this guy's just coming in here. He doesn't even know what's going on.
Okay, one problem with that today, it seems to me, in Brave New World in general, and clearly, therefore, Shakespeare's work is relevant insofar as he stands at the dawn of it, one problem is that the premise is undermine that exposure and the efficacy of that exposure. I'll explain this. You can show any book to anyone, but the reader is already brought up with a kind of prejudice against the author. He is writing from his point of view. I have my point of view. He is entitled to my 5 minutes of attention as long as he doesn't try to impinge upon my point of view. As soon as I realize that his point of view is attacking my point of view, I have the right to throw him away. You see, how dare he? How dare you? How dare he write? How dare he? And so now what we're doing is we're left with throwing away all the great authors who inevitably impinge upon our sense of certainty and expose the lies that are couched in, that certainty that we cherish so much. So the dangerous authors, the ones we have kept and cherished for thousands of years, all in a sudden are the bad ones. Because in our brave new world, danger is bad and safety is automatically good. That is a problem. How do you reintegrate these authors when they are the bad guys? As soon as you start reading them, I mean, after a couple of pages, you start realizing either they don't mean anything at all, or if they mean something, it ain't looking good for us. So if they're right, we're wrong. Therefore, they must be wrong because we are right.
We have to be right. If we're not right, heaven help us.
But we're in a new world. And in the new world, the new is always better than the old.
Yes.
As the world is founded on this principle, we're evolving. And maybe some people have, the more sophisticated of our intellectuals, have given up on the formal, beautiful idea, illustrious idea of progress, unqualified progress. Nevertheless, they will say, look, maybe our times are not better than others, but that's all we got. So in practical terms, de facto, yes, our times are best for us. And so you must assimilate. And if you don't assimilate, something's wrong with you. What's wrong with you? But what is that? Well, the moon. The moon. No, don't look up. Look here. What's wrong with this finger? I don't know what's wrong with it. It's pointing upward. That's what's wrong with it. Lower your finger. And the same goes for problems. If you're pointing your finger at a problem, that you can always psychologize the finger holder and say he's got a problem. It's in your head. Say, once we solve your problem, so we get rid of human nature, we get rid of the human longing. The other problem is tied to what Bloom has, as you pointed out, and here I'm going to throw it back at you there. The other problem is, sure, the cultivation of longing, truth, beauty, and okay. But if he is the first one to let you on to the lie, he doesn't believe in it. We need the longing. We need it. We have to recycle it, just as the Communist Party in China had to recycle Buddhism and Confucius, by the way. Now you have Confucius centers, cultural centers springing, popping up all over the world. They have this super Confucius, horrid sculpture, postmodern sculpture in Cambridge in UK. Of course, it means that the footprint of the Communist Party is there. In fact, if you read the the label underneath the plaque, it reads from Communist Party. It's such a it's the popular, whatever they render it in English as, the Republic of China. And there is this horrid representation, very solid metal. Okay, what tells us that we're not longing for a golden calf?
Right. As you point out, that's why I think that Bloom was onto something, but he makes the same mistake as the Chinese Communist Party in a certain way as China, by saying none of it's real still, but we do need it.
We need it.
In a certain way is his answer. And I think that that's an issue with a lot of Straussians, is they want to say, I saw a funny web comic about this the other day, that it was I found out all of these things that we need for a functioning society, and you have to believe them really, really hard. And if you believe them, we'll have a good society. And the person responds, says, "Oh, so they're true?" He says, "Well, no, I don't think so. I'm too smart to think so, but you might get something out of them." This approach, this attitude is wrong.
We need the carrot.
Exactly.
We need a carrot.
As you say, yeah, you can't make Bloom your basis for restoring a liberal education, because Bloom himself believes in it only accidentally. And I think that I don't know what the practical answer for the renewal is, but I know that as you point out, Brutus and Cassius show us that in the midst of the pressure of something else, in a certain way, if you want to say that Caesar represents a tyrannizing force, if not a tyranny, a solo uno in Machiavelli's sense, that he's the single ruler that threatens to stomp the few and subvert, or not but put the many in chains, something like this. It's very easy to just say we have to compromise because we have to beat this. But if you compromise on the most fundamental things, as we see, they end up compromising and also not beating it. They don't win.
Yeah, this is an important point, I think, in Shakespeare's play, because certainly it is Cassius who looks, in fact, Brutus learns to do the same, who looks upon Caesar as a tyrant. That is not what other characters think, is it? And it turns out that, in fact, I mean, a tyrant is not really representing the people. And if we look at the role of Caesar, we see that as not as really tyranny, but in fact as an alternative, the most, perhaps arguably, the most daunting, the most formidable alternative to tyranny. What you have with tyranny is, of course, the destruction of law. And that is anarchy, which is the consummation of tyranny. Caesar is there to avert tyranny, to avert anarchy. However, Caesar will fail, and this, I think, is clear. Caesar, as one Caesar, will fail if he doesn't listen to the soothsayers, if he doesn't listen to, shall we say, Shakespeare. So if our kings listen to Shakespeare, then they won't pretend to be what they're not. They will understand that they're there for the people, to represent the interests of the people. Otherwise, they're dead meat. And in fact, they will serve as a scapegoat, as it happens in the Shakespeare's play. He is, we'll get rid of him, and we're all clean, we're all safe, we're all good if we just get rid of one. However, one follows another. So you haven't solved the problem. Okay. Is this a possibility for us today? In other words, can we still have a non-Machiavellian reading of political authority that allows for the one in alliance with the few and definitely not reducible to the few and definitely not against the interests of the many? Can we recover a non-Machiavellian understanding of political life, of practical life? And can our authors help us? Let us agree now that our authors can help us, because after all, I mean, they're alternative teachers, right? And yet we have this obstacle. Kids of all ages are coming to these books, these non-Machiavellian teachers, moved by a prejudice. So the book alone won't overcome that problem. Because as soon as Shakespeare opens his mouth, he's either there to boost our morale as Anglo-American speakers. We have an English civilization to defend, and we can use Shakespeare to make ourselves look smarter. Or they mean nothing. Who the hell cares? He lived 500 years ago. Or else they're bad. Let's cancel him because he said something naughty. He was a bigoted, you name it. You give me all those other terms that they have today. So in any case, he has been castrated. He can no longer serve as our teacher. We would need mediation. We would need educators helping the students, helping readers get back to that trust in the author. If you don't trust, if you have killed trust, you have killed interpretation. And if we teach children to mistrust and therefore to be suspicious everywhere, if we cultivate cynicism in children, our authors are dead for us. And
I think
yeah,
I think that's right, is what needs to be restored. And I think probably we've hit the note to end on, probably, because this
yes,
is as the opening video to this Florida project.
yes,
What we need is a restoration of the teacher to help students, to help open students' eyes and allow them to remove the prejudices that they come into the text with, in the sense that a lot of teachers pretend to do today, but to really do.
to show them also that they have the right to hear a non-Machiavellian teacher. They have the right to heed the voice, the message in the bottle, and not just pretend.
Mm-hmm.
We have the right to be, not just to pretend to be. To be readers, yeah? And also one day, maybe even writers.
And if we can restore that, I think is the way to overcome the question of Brutus and Cassius. So
the door is open.
It is.
All right. It's been a pleasure, Ted. And I look forward to meeting up again for further discussions.
Sounds great.